we've now got Callum McMenamin from DIA and the GCDO stepping up. He is going to talk about how to build trust with accessible websites and services. His expertise in digital inclusivity will provide valuable insights for us all. And like everybody else, I found out a fun fact about Callum is that he's a master at making balloon animals and often entertains at charity events. So you'll see him at drinks. Just bring your own balloons.
Thanks for that. Definitely a truthful fun fact. So kia ora, ko Callum McMenamin, tōku ingoa. I work at Te Tāri Tai Whenua Internal Affairs, as has been stated, and I'm a web standards consultant. So I mainly work on how to build and maintain standards for government websites. And one of the things I really care about is the accessibility of government websites. So that's really around whether disabled people can use and interact with government digital services. So here's some background. So many New Zealand government agencies are actually required to meet the New Zealand government web standards. There's a mandate from Cabinet that dates back to 2003, so it's been around for 20 years, quite a while. The Web Accessibility Standard in particular mandates this international set of guidelines that many governments around the world have adopted called the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, or WCAG for short, Level AA Conformance. Nice and easy to understand, a lot of words there. But you can have a look at this standard. It's just on digital.govt.nz, just sitting there, and pretty much the New Zealand standard just points to the international guidelines with a couple of exceptions. So then comes the question, well, how well are government agencies conforming to these standards? So there were these things called self-assessments, where effectively we asked government agencies to mark their own homework and self-assess their websites against the standards. So these assessments occurred in 2014 and 2017. And as part of that process, a recommendation was made to automate certain aspects of that testing. So with web accessibility in particular, there are actually quite a few parts of that testing against the WCAG standard that you can automate and test for without needing a human to do all of the grunt work. And so here is that automated system. And yes, this is an official government logo. It has been approved. I do have a T-shirt with the logo on it, except I lost it just before this event, so that was really sad. So it's the logo is like a pixel art of a little yellow duck wearing dark sunglasses, holding a magnifying glass. And we call it QAC, or Centralised Web Accessibility Checker. A lot of people call it CWAC for some reason, but no, it's QAC. And I named it that purely because it's funny to say. So QAC is software that was developed in-house in Internal Affairs by our Web Standards team. QAC can scan hundreds and hundreds of websites across multiple organisations for accessibility issues using automated tests. So effectively, it can provide indicative, frequent and broad accessibility test data that will give us system-level insights on how well government agencies are complying with the mandatory web accessibility standard. However, automated testing isn't the silver bullet. It can't test everything. There's some things that we can't automate yet. So it provides us at least some level of assurance as to whether particular requirements in the web accessibility standard are being met. So for example, we can automatically test whether text colour contrast is easy to see for people with low vision. You can programmatically determine that in most cases. However, detecting whether a video has captions is often much more difficult to automate because those captions might be burnt into the video file, for instance. So QAC is built mainly using Python 3. It uses Selenium to control instances of Google Chrome. And the main accessibility rules engine is this open source platform called AxeCore. It's just a massive JavaScript file that contains hundreds of different tests that find things that may make it difficult for disabled people to use a website. So, how did we get this across the line inside of a government agency? Well, you slap the word pilot on the front, and it's much easier to get things going. So, we decided to start a 6-month pilot of this approach to see whether it was feasible and whether it was worth doing. So, it started in May 2023, and we invited 16 government agencies to be part of the pilot. So it was quite a large number of government agencies. So the whole point was that we just really don't have this frequent accessibility test data. And I think the main part of this strategy is I believe that what gets measured gets fixed. And for as long as we do not measure where these accessibility issues exist, they will never be resolved. I think often accessibility issues that impact disabled people go unnoticed. Because if you aren't disabled, you don't encounter those barriers every day. You might not notice that a building lacks a wheelchair-accessible ramp if you can walk. But if you rely on using a wheelchair, the lack of that ramp is glaringly obvious. So that is kind of the philosophy behind this. So how does it work in a practical sense? Well, Quack takes a massive list of URLs, every single URL for a public-facing website in the New Zealand government. And even that in itself is a massive task because there is no centralised list currently of all the government websites. So we're going to do that as part of the Quack project. And then it uses a web crawler to randomly visit 50 pages within each of those specified websites. And then it runs automated tests on those 50 pages, and it outputs the results into a CSV file, which we can just send to agencies or even publish publicly. So what have we learnt so far? So here's an example of some of the test data that came out of the pilot program. And there is a bar chart on the screen with various government website URLs. And some of the websites that we have hundreds of automatically identifiable accessibility barriers. So each one of those numbers could represent a way that a disabled person would either not be able to interact with a service or really struggle to interact with that service. So we want to get that down to 0 for everything at some stage soon. So when we looked at the data from the pilot program, we found that most of the issues were critical or serious issues, which generally indicates that they could be show-stopping barriers for disabled people or make it quite difficult to interact with that service. These estimations of severity are provided by AXCore, so those are sort of just baked into the open source library that we're using. Some disabled people cannot use a mouse, so if you're blind, for instance, you might not be able to see a mouse cursor, or if you have a tremor, for instance, and struggle to accurately use a pointer, you might need to use your keyboard to interact with a website. We discovered around a third of tested web pages in the pilot program had elements that were not usable for sighted keyboard users due to a complete lack of a keyboard focus indicator. So the results that we got in the Quack pilot program were consistent with those self-assessments that were done in 2014, 2017. So that gives us some confidence. The results are consistent with what we knew before, so therefore maybe it worked properly. This really confirms that government agencies continue to struggle with complying with the mandatory accessibility standard. We also ran a survey of the pilot agencies that we worked with to understand their experiences of the pilot program and web accessibility more broadly. We discovered that 83% of the pilot agencies discovered issues that they didn't know about before. And 67% of government agencies fixed issues in response to the scanning that Quack did. And this is one of the other ideas, is maybe when we start centrally scanning for these problems and sending people reports, that might motivate agencies to fix things. 42% of respondents in the pilot program were not using any form of automated accessibility testing. This is probably quite concerning because accessibility testing is very easy to automate and is generally free. So we really should be establishing automated testing across all government web. We noticed that multiple government agencies in the pilot program worked really hard to fix all the identified accessibility issues that we found in the pilot program. And the data that we have shows a slight reduction in the average number of accessibility issues in each page over 6 months. So it went from about 4.24 to 3.86 issues per page on average over 4 months. So about a 9% reduction over a period of 4 months during the pilot program. I've got a line chart on the projector right now, and you can see there is a slight downwards trend in the average number of accessibility issues detected across 3 of the pilot scans. I left out the first one because there was a few bugs in it, and yeah, it went a bit weird. So we also ran a series of research interviews with web accessibility vendors, agencies, and disabled people's organisations. Sorry, how many minutes are left?
Sorry, that's 2 minutes.
Yep, all good. So now we're scaling up to scan all public sector websites. We sent out the email to agencies yesterday informing them that we're going to be doing this. We had no complaints yet, so that's a plus. We're also going to be exploring whether we can report this publicly, and I think that'll be really cool. That'll build trust, theme of the conference. Also, the code is open source. It's under a GPL v3 license. We followed the New Zealand government open access licensing framework software extension, I believe it's called, or NZ Goal SE, which helped us follow the correct process for open sourcing government software. So it's on github.com/govtnz/quack. And please don't be too mean when you're reading my code. So that's kind of cool. You can send any emails or questions or whatever to web.standards@dia.govt.nz or scan the QR code on the projector. Thank you.
Thank you, Callum. Can Quack access intranets as well as external sites?
No, that would be a security nightmare.
And I think AI has huge potential to enhance accessibility. Do you agree?
I think AI has a massive potential to increase accessibility. We might even reach a stage where the user interfaces that we use automatically adapt to people's particular needs. That's where I think that could go really well.
Last question. Are there certain standards that have higher weighting than others?
So in the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, there are different levels of conformance, and they might have a different level of impact or importance. So generally level A, you want to aim for first, then work on level AA rules. That's usually a pretty good way to go about it.
Cool. Thanks very much. Cool. Thanks for that, Callum. It was really worthwhile, and web accessibility is one of those things that I think we kind of all need to get on. And like the analogy to the wheelchair accessible buildings, everybody can use a slope. Not everybody can use stairs. Why don't we just build buildings with slopes? I think the same could be said with web accessibility as well.